Good morning, everybody. It's This Week in XR. Today is June 24th, 2022. I'm Charlie Fink. I'm here with my friend Ted Chilowitz. As always, our show is sponsored by Virbela. And today our guests are Andrew Zimmerman, the CEO of Journey, a new design agency, and Cathy Hackl is their Chief Metaverse Officer. And she'll be joining Andrew and getting her, she's almost got her fifth appearance on our show. She was on the show early 3 times in 2020 and 2021. She's a fantastic guest.
Is a veteran and one of the vocal spokespeople of all things related to XR.
Yeah.
So
yes.
she is definitely in the club.
Yes, and she is young and she is energetic and she is everywhere. So it'll be fun to try and catch up with her for a hot minute. Also, I've gotten a lot of great feedback about our podcast, special podcast last week with Neil Stevenson and Peter Vesnes.
That's great. Yeah, it was interesting to talk to them. You know, I have a relationship with Neil and we've been chatting about lots of different things over the years. And it was nice to kind of kick it around with them in such an open fashion. I think we're probably one of the few that really got that kind of access to this sort of stuff, right? So that was good.
Yeah, I feel lucky. So a lot of interesting news this week.
Yeah, it's been a big, busy week, right? Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's busy, and sometimes it's kind of overwhelming with the amount of announcements and things that are bubbling up.
You know, I'm thinking of renaming the column "This Week with Meta," because
I mean, they're certainly deploying and delivering on a lot of things. Almost in some ways, although it's hard to say this, maybe too much too fast. Like people can't even keep up with it, right?
I mean, it really is like the days of the .com boom when you had AOL and Microsoft just putting out press release upon press release. We're starting this new channel. We've hired this person. We're getting distribution from this company. And it's you know, that's, although the things from Meta, it's interesting. They do sort of big things and little things. Yeah. You know, so it's kind of a mixture. Although if you add all those things up, you certainly see a pattern. I mean, whatever the pattern is right now, you know, Mark Zuckerberg has an itch to scratch where he's explaining everything, but no one has explained to him that nothing kills a show faster than too much exposition.
Too much media coverage and too much delivery. Yeah. You've got to. Well, Apple is sort of the other side of that equation, right? So, yeah. But I think it's great for us to be able to see the sort of shining spot of where he wants his energy to be and exposing that he's.
I would actually, if I worked at the actual Facebook or Instagram or someplace, I'd be thinking, why doesn't these guys just spin us off? He doesn't care about this business anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting perspective on it. Yeah, I mean, he's certainly about the new, right? And certainly about pushing this agenda. That he believes that the world will start.
Okay, but Instagram isn't 10 years old. So in the world of companies, it's still brand new. And if it got spun off, it could be a very, very substantial player.
Well, it's already a giantly substantial player. It's interesting to think about it if it would have different management and a different sort of philosophy behind it. But I don't disagree with you that his energy force is around the devices, the new devices, and how they relate to this digital landscape that he apparently believes that people will be in more than I think even we think, you know, people are going to be in, and we're pretty bullish on it.
And then, you know, you remember Walt Disney used to introduce the wonderful world of Disney, and then back in our day in the late 80s and 90s, Michael Eisner tried to imitate him, and it was just so unbelievably wooden and lame. And Eisner seemed to be the only person who didn't realize what a horrible actor he was. So I feel like we're sort of back there where, you know, Zuck is so earnest and genuinely excited about what they're doing, but he's a terrible actor. You know, he appears to be trying to sell, not genuinely enjoy, because he's over-rehearsed. And so whatever is happening there in the Zuck as a personality management business is going terribly wrong.
Well, I agree with parts of that, but I think maybe the thing that I see a little glimmer of hope is when he just walks through the devices sitting in the engineering room, there's a little more authenticity to that than the scripted version doesn't work at all, as we've seen, right? But the unscripted, this is what we're building, this is why we're building it, this is why I think it's cool. I think you actually start to see the real person there. At least I think so.
Yeah, maybe I mean, but also, you know, he was on Kramer this week. It actually hurt the stock. although
Yeah.
Kramer gave it 2 thumbs up.
Yeah, giant
We know
thumbs
he
up.
has a deep understanding of the medium.
Yeah, well, such is life.
So going to the rest of the news this week, we had Tim Cook bragging on the headset on China Daily. That's kind of fun. He's actually opening up a little bit, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think this is the more tidbits mean there is something coming, and you know, all the rumors and all the pieces and parts are starting to line up, right?
Well,
So,
yeah. I mean, he knows it's going to happen, so now he's talking about it.
right.
Whereas before, maybe not so much. So getting back to Meta, they launched a wallet. Like they want it to be like Apple Wallet, and then they start selling clothing for avatars, which you can pay for with your wallet.
Yep.
So
What do you think about
that sort of went together, and goes with the whole idea of trying to create some kind of creator economy, so people who are building in Horizons can get paid for their work and transferred. I think Rec Room just announced today that their creators had cashed out $1 million already. So I think that bodes well for Meta creators on the Horizon platform.
Yeah, I think to your point, Charlie, sometimes the smaller things, across what Meta is doing and delivering all.
Right, they're spending $1 billion a month. They've got a lot to talk about. No, I know why they're doing it in the sense that they are generating news all the time. So they just have a choice to keep it.
Impactful.
Pardon?
Sometimes the smaller things I think are usually more impactful, like they actually have real impact, right?
Well, I think the wallet and buying avatars, costumes for avatars, clearly that's something people want to do. I think it's a little more fun in Fortnite, but these are, avatars for every kind of use, not for just in a, battle royale environment, so right. I think people will buy them. I think that they're going to make a nice business out of this.
Yeah, I agree.
Tencent, the giant video game company we don't hear much from these days, they're forming an XR unit finally.
Right. And they are the underpinnings of a lot of stuff, right? Obviously, the largest investor in Epic Games, and
they own 40%.
Continually driving sort of the underpinnings of this, and committed to a metaverse play, right? They believe in it, they understand it. They're starting to put energy into it, so we're going to see.
This is a very, very wealthy company. I'm not sure how many people outside of our bubble know that, but this is a company that has, Meta type resources if it wanted.
Dominating China. Yeah.
So there's a company called Metaphysics. I wonder if you've heard of this, because it's a Swiss company. They have a product called Metatouch that uses it connects to the nervous system via someplace on the surface of your skin.
Right.
And then it uses, all sorts of, it stimulates your nerves. So, it kind of gives you a physical sensation that can be synced with a digital environment.
Yeah, this was a new one on me. This was something that I hadn't heard of before,
It's a very science fiction-y idea, right? That you're not going to wear a haptic vest. You're actually going to feel it in another way by stimulating your nerves.
Yeah, this one seems like something a little bit out of a dystopian novel, but it works. I guess it'll be something we'll get to try at some point, right?
Okay, just a couple stories left, and then we're gonna bring in Cathy. Let's start with the here we go, Metaverse Standards Forum.
Yeah, so that's, I think, a big deal, right? I look at the array of companies that are joining it. It's interesting. Do we know who started it, who's behind it, like initially? Because there's a lot of companies that have agreed to be a part of this thing. Some big ones and a bunch of small ones.
Yeah, there were a few absences, but it really was everybody. It doesn't say in the story. That's by the way Amanda Sibberling story from TechCrunch. Thank you, Amanda, for providing this content. It's led by the Kronos Group, a nonprofit consortium working on AR, VR, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and more. Kronos has already tried to set a standard for VR APIs with its similarly named VR Standards Initiative in 2016, which included Google, NVIDIA, Epic Games, and Oculus. So
they've got some experience at it, and a lot of people kicked in and said, yeah, we think this is an important step to sort of define at least some degree of open standards and use cases, because this is what we talk about all the time is, the utopian idea of the metaverse versus the actual commercial deliverables of companies that need to make a profit and need to find a business in the metaverse, and how do they work both sides of the equation, right? So it's pretty interesting. It's gonna be interesting to see how that plays out.
One last thing, Kpmg launches a metaverse based on Web3 in the Engage Link Collaboration Hub. You remember last week we were talking about how they're preparing to launch this, and they have some pretty major clients. So of course there's Kpmg, which would count as that.
Right, and that brings a lot of the sort of mainstream business understanding, and their clients are not typically, the most kind of forward-thinking tech companies. They're big enterprise groups that need this kind of tech consulting and digital help consulting. So I think that's a good step.
So they said that the platform, which they are calling the Metaverse Collaboration Hub, will be the center of their Web3 strategy. So I had to ask them, what is there about Engage that you think makes it the center of a Web3 strategy? Because Engage is, a closed system run by one company.
Right. And this is the point, right? Did they have an
so, and then they wrote back and said, oh, well, okay. I mean, we're going to be working on Web3 from there.
Right.
So
yeah, like I said, this is a tough one for companies to grapple with.
All right, but right? You know who might know about this? I'm thinking that Andrew Zimmerman and Cathy Hackl will have a lot to say.
Certainly have some insights on this stuff.
Yeah, so let's bring them in. And here they are. Cathy Hackl, Andy Zimmerman, thank you so much for coming on our podcast this morning. And Cathy, great to see you. I can't pin you down. You are everywhere, including ringing the bell at the NASDAQ. So how did you guys figure that one out at NFT week of all places?
Yeah, I mean, so happy to be here, Charlie. Yeah, it's been quite a crazy couple of years, I think, right?
Yeah, I think the last time we had you on the show was like the early spring of 2021. It's a year and a half ago.
Yeah, and I've done the show, I think, how many times?
This is the fourth time.
It's the fourth.
You and Roni Abovitz, we got to get you guys like smoking jackets.
Yeah.
I know, right? The club, the fourth
sweatshirts with 5-timers club on there.
Andrew, it's a pleasure to meet you as well. Your reputation precedes you. Congrats on the new company. It sounds like you've pulled together already. You have amazing partners, and sounds like some exciting clients. So I look forward to hearing about those.
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for having me, Charlie and Ted.
Our pleasure. We look forward to discussing Andy and learning.
Yeah, so let's just start. Andy, it's a brand new company, so assume we know nothing.
Sure. It's new and it isn't, in the sense that we're not a startup. We're actually 3 companies have come together. And I'll explain the basic thesis of the company journey is, well, maybe just mentioning real quickly, I previously was CEO of Frog Design for 7 years, which many people are aware, is one of the largest.
Yeah, legendary company.
Yeah. And I left at the end of the year, but in the midst of that, I was planning to launch a new agency that focuses on the customer journey, hence the name Journey, but really the touch points that either are just being created. So take something like the metaverse, or touch points that need to be completely reimagined in this new world, like physical space, whether retail, food and bev, or whatever. And my feeling was that we want to be the agency that's focused on that futurescape of what a customer journey looks like, and have creative and strategic talent that can help a brand or a company make that evolution to that new world, new customer journey. So the first 3 companies that came together, Cathy Hackl's company, obviously for the metaverse, and Cathy can talk about how we're building out her capabilities to include building and so forth, hence the NASDAQ project we did last week. The second company is a company called iCrave, which actually does physical design. So it designs restaurants, hotels. You might say, well, isn't that kind of old news? Well, not really, because this is the firm that's known for doing reimagining things. So take, for example, the JetBlue terminal in JFK, which was the first terminal to implement iPads and reimagine the passenger journey. the largest nightclub in the world, three floors high. It looks like it's a virtual experience, but it's actually a physical place where people are dancing and having fun. And there's some things that were mentioned recently, a Web 3.0 building in Times Square, which is being developed, which will be a place for both live shows and immersive experiences and a metaverse equivalent. So that's sort of the physical. And then the final one is a voice agency, because we think voice is core to these sort of going through these various experiences. And this is a company, Skill Creative, that recently won the Webby for voice experience with something we did with HBO Max, where you have discovery in the home. So those are the first three, and we have more on the way. And it's pulling together these studios and capabilities to kind of create that next chapter in the customer journey.
So Cathy, sorry, go ahead.
So it's interesting because I know Frog Design well. I did some projects with Frog Design many, many years ago. And I was thinking as you were talking about the fact that Frog Design really had its moment in designing physical things with a digital use case, right? Obviously, they were involved with Apple in the early days quite a bit. And now it seems like there's a logical transition to kind of flipping that script, where the physical is migrating to the fully digital with physical attributes and physical sensibilities. And that's a lot of what the metaverse is. So as you're talking, it kind of makes an interesting sense that your journey moved from the physical, allowing technology to be in people's laps, in people's hands, with various devices and whatnot. And now you're sort of modifying that to the world is migrating to digital goods and services and digital collectibles, and the idea of an NFT as something that has real value and real substance, even though it's just pixels on a screen somewhere. It seems like you're kind of leaning into that with three sort of divisions that you're tapping. Yeah. Would you say that's a correct assessment of the?
That's fair, Ted. And yeah, I wasn't there for all of the evolution of Frog. It's been around for 50 years, but you described it very well. And I feel like this is kind of the next wave. One of the things in terms of physical, when I talk about is I think we need people that design in 3D. And one thing about physical, you're designing real places with real people moving through space and time with sound and light. And 2D, and I'm not saying I love my former, I love Frog, but a lot of what we did was in that digital space, 2D screens, whether it's websites or mobile apps. So it's kind of, this confluence of, the gaming sort of traditions and look and feel, the sort of very, physical, high resolution types of feelings and moving through space and time. And I think where the puck is headed is pulling those together. And that's why we have these different agencies that we have, under the same roof. And it's already creatively just been amazing, fascinating to see the juices of these different creative perspectives kind of coming together and what we can come up with very quickly.
Cathy, let's talk a little bit about how you pulled off the NASDAQ. It looked like there were a lot of people from a lot of different groups there. So, and that was, you synced it up with NYC NFT or NFT NYC. So it sounds like a great time. Tell us a little about it.
Yeah, it was kind of an unofficial opening, right? Because NFT NYC didn't start till Monday, and we rang the bell on a Friday, but it was kind of an unofficial opening. Yeah, I mean, we partnered with NASDAQ and Manticore Games, Core Games specifically, to do the first bell ringing, both in the physical world and in the metaverse. It's a gaming, and a gaming platform, but let's call it the metaverse, right? Okay. But we did it live. I think that's what people don't understand. This is not pre-recorded. This was done live, and when you've done lots of TV and stuff, like anything could go wrong when it's live. But it went really well. We worked in tandem. So what Andy was mentioning, so my company, I was mostly just strategy, right? It was strategy, myself and a couple of people under doing metaverse strategy and Web3. And then when we got acquired by Andy, one of the things I wanted to do was build out the world building capabilities. So we, now we have a gaming studio. We have pretty much a world building practice, right? Led by Lee Keebler, who's former Intel, Nike. He's been in the XR space for quite a while, former CTO to will.i.am. So he's leading up our world building. And yeah, it was kind of one of those things that, I don't want to kind of promise this to everyone, but we built it pretty quickly. All right. It was kind of one of those things. We saw an opportunity and we built it quickly, and we did it live. And one of the things I did, Charlie, is I invited a lot of amazing partners and women in the space.
Yeah.
Because I also saw it as a moment that we could highlight, that the future
Mhm.
could be different.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's really exciting. And Andy was there right next to me. And I was just, oh my goodness, it was just
And
exhilarating.
then we were covered by, we were told by NASDAQ that it was one of the longest coverings by CNBC of an opening bell. Normally they show it for 5 seconds and go away. And it was kind of funny because I think Jim Cramer wasn't really paying attention, and then he got kind of intrigued and said, oh, this is pretty cool, and this company journey, and he says they're going to the metaverse, so they went public on the NASDAQ today. And no, we didn't go public.
It was we virtually you did.
Virtually.
You practiced. You were practicing.
We were practicing. Yeah.
I said in the remarks, which are available on NASDAQ, but not on CNBC. I did say maybe a few years from now, we may be back ringing the bell for different reasons.
I hope
so. It's funny.
So
But
Cathy,
the funny part, Charlie, the funny part was actually when it went live on CNBC, because they had gotten the information, the 3 anchors had avatars themselves. So they did this really nice blending. I don't know, it just played, it was so, yeah, we didn't, we had no visibility into that. NASDAQ didn't either, but they had it all prepared. So
I looked for video of it when I was putting together the column yesterday, and I couldn't find any. But if send me the link, and I can still stick it in there. We've been trying to have you on, Cathy, for months because you wrote a book. So let's just Andy, let's just hit on the book, because this is the pre-journey, Cathy. Let's just hit on the book for 5 minutes, since we didn't get you on the show to talk about it. And I just read Matthew Ball's book. I got advanced copy because they think I'm some kind of a writer or something. And of course I read your book. And as it happens, I'm writing a book also on the metaverse. And there's a tremendous amount of things that are agreed upon. There are a tremendous amount of things that are kind of been determined by self-interest. The metaverse is a made-up word. So, I think trying to be too strict about its meaning is counterproductive. But I thought your book came at it in a really clear-eyed way. So maybe you can tell the listeners a little bit about the book. I know you had some co-conspirators who helped put it together. And let's make sure we talk about them too.
Yeah, definitely. And I do have to give a shout out to you, because you really wrote, Neil wrote Snow Crash, right? And he coined the term, but the first metaverse book really was yours.
I know, and it's so funny because I used it as a metaphor of everything being connected. It wasn't the metaverse per se, as if people would actually build it.
So shout out to you, because I was part of that book. So I remember.
It certainly has helped sales a little bit.
This book really came about really fast. I was doing, some work with Upland, and, I had an idea, let's come together, let's put all our 3 voices together and write a book, right? And when you read the book, there's 3 different voices throughout the whole book. I do have to say, for everyone listening to this, there's a bigger bent in the book on Web3, right? Because my co-authors do come more from a Web3 background than an XR background. So some of the XR that's, included in there is because I was pushing, we need to include this as well. We can't just be focused on Web3. So, but it's a great, I think it's a great primer. There's great frameworks which people can use. It's a great way to start navigating, right? And it's done really well. We've gotten some great reviews. The Harvard Business Review reviewed it. So that was really exciting. So that was really exciting. So
just winding this conversation up, and then we'll get back to Journey. Yeah. So did you come up, the 3 of you guys, examining everything that's going on? Did you come up with a definition of the metaverse that you can share?
I'm going to be honest, Charlie. I said this at NASDAQ. I said, I don't seek to define it. I seek to build it and create it together with other people.
I love that.
I'm so tired. We've been through this in XR.
I know. That's what it feels like to me. And do we really care today whether somebody says XR or AR and VR? It's
MR. Everyone's
we know what they mean in context. It's a stylistic choice as much as anything, right? It's very slippery to try and define made up words.
Yeah. So, I think we all have our ways of defining it. Yeah. And, the reality is it's not here. We're all building towards it, right? All of us are doing something to build towards it. So I'm moving away from having to define it, right? To thinking more through how do we build it? What are the, how do we actually activate this and create this? Because I'll be honest, I've gotten, hate for trying to define it or, things like that. And I'm just kind of guys, let's take a step back. Why are we obsessed with the definition? Who owns the definition? That's the other the other part. we're all
Right.
building it together.
Well, we get back to the original branding question, right? Which is,
Yeah.
isn't Amazon a river in South America?
That's a good point. Good
Because
point.
the services, and in this case, the
Mhm.
places will define the word,
Yeah.
not self-interested people in private industry or even pundits.
Yeah. So, and will we call it metaverse in 10 years? I don't even know that we will.
Yeah,
Will
I don't know.
we
We may be
be-
talking
I don't
about
even
virtual
know.
worlds, or it'll be derived from devices, or who the heck knows.
Charlie, you and I have made reference to, because metaverse has become the word du jour, but we like sort of this historical discussion of, we had a terminology called the World Wide Web, and then we had this terminology called
Cyberspace.
Cyberspace is another one.
The
and then,
electronic superhighway.
the information superhighway was another good one. And then that somehow coalesced in this sort of thing called the internet, right?
Mhm.
Which we use as the blanket term, which has now sort of been usurped in the little XR corner and other parts by this word, the metaverse. But, even when we talked to Neil, like we did last week when we were talking, it's just a terminology that came from a fictional understanding of,
Right.
the metaphorical idea of things, which is
Sure.
really an important thing to understand. That, and I think, Cathy, you're dead on that. We put a little too much stock in the nomenclature when really what's happening
Because
is
we don't have
underpinning-
that much else right now.
Right, which is fine, but the underpinnings of Web3, as we all like to study and look at, as the real sort of big change in what the internet is bound to become as we get better graphics and different devices to access our daily lives, which we're doing now, is something both of you are studying, right? So I have an interesting sort of piece of this controversy that I would love to get your opinion on, because and Charlie and I talk about this a lot. So because you are now talking about world building and architecting, and you come from the design world, and you mentioned physical spaces that you're designing in the metaverse, we have a little bit of a challenge of the idea of physically moving around with your mouse or your trackpad or your gaming device to get from point A to point B, which is how this kind of falsehood of an economy of these virtual lands are starting to kind of set themselves up, is, well, you have to be next to these things, and these things are worth more, kind of like physical real estate, when in actuality, we should be able, in the Star Trek lingo, to just transport around to the places we want with a click of a button, right? So you have to have some opinion on that from an architectural standpoint, as you're
That's a
looking
great
at the
metaphor,
concept
right?
of
Because
Journey, because your company's called Journey, right? So
Alan Smithson is building, this giant virtual mall. So, and the assumption of that is that I'm going to go to a floor in that mall, and I'm going to look at merchandise the way I would browse avatars in VR chat.
right. But wouldn't you just
but
hop
that
to the places you want to look
assumes
at?
that I'm gonna go there and stroll around the room. Whereas, today you could, for example, scroll through 3D objects, on your 2D screen. So what's your thinking about how those spaces are going to look and feel for brands that you're working with?
It's one of the most interesting questions of the architecture of a Web3 infrastructure. So I'm curious.
Yeah. I'll tell you what I think, and then I'll let Andy kind of answer from his perspective as well. So this is what I think. I think that we think about the internet as a place we go to, right? And I believe that eventually when we do enable the physical side of the metaverse, it'll just be around us. We don't necessarily go somewhere, right? So I think that that's different. Will I want to go to a virtual mall? Maybe, right? Maybe to buy something, I don't know. So yeah, I mean, there's so many underpinnings there, right? On, can virtual land be moved? Should virtual land be here? Should virtual land be there, right? I think that the reality is that what I'm excited about, and what most of the brands that I work with are excited about, is the underlying technology of the fact that they can own the virtual piece of land in a smart contract, right? There's debate as to whether can you really own it or not, right? But I think that they're excited about that, thinking what comes after the website? Is it virtual land? Right. So I think that there's some questions there around what the brands are perceiving as valuable, right? What has value if they can build on it? So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a very big debate, but for me, it's the idea and the concept of, does it stop being a place we go to, and does it start being a place that's all around us, right? The metaverse, is the concept, right?
We had Brad Oberweger, who is the acting CEO and executive chairman of Second Life.
Yeah.
And he's super, super smart guy. And he said basically, Ted, correct me if I'm not putting this in the right way, but he said what land really represents in Second Life is a space on the server.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so in that sense, for it really to be yours, you have to be able to say, you know what, Sandbox, I'm taking my stuff and going to another server.
Yeah, I'm paying for my AWS like over here.
Right.
Yeah,
I mean,
I'm buying a piece of the data center. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the underlying technology, like for an NFT specifically, right? I think it's the underlying. You're paying for the underlying computer program in the smart contract, right? That you're paying for, right? But there's still debate as to whether you really own it, because if it's in someone else's server, like whatever, right? So I think that there is a
crypto
lot
winter
of
has made that quite the question, right? Because
oh my
you can be
goodness,
validated on a
ever,
blockchain that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. So
But
I don't, it's such a good question. It's such a big debate. I don't know, like, is it worth, for me personally, when I'm working with the brands, really what we're doing right now is experimenting. It is doing pilots. It's trying to push the limits of the technology, right? So is it worth it for me to kind of have this really deep debate? No, because right now what they're doing are pilots. They're trying to figure out, what are they doing? Are they playing in the NFT space? Are they doing something in gaming, right? So it's all part of a strategy that we've laid out for them. There are questions, right? Should we buy virtual land is one of the biggest questions I get, right? And sometimes for some brands, yes. Sometimes for other brands, it's a no. So I don't know. I do think that, I don't know. It's definitely something, Ted, that I'm going to like probably go to sleep tonight and think a lot really
well,
deeply on.
the fact that
but-
you are struggling with it actually
Yeah.
gives me hope, because there are so many people that are sort of postulating that this is how it's going to work. But in actuality, just like we never really kind of knew how the internet was going to evolve and who was going to sort of win these different sort of gamesmanship of these pieces and parts of it, we're in the next phase of that, right? But I just think, like, and Andy, this is maybe something where your brain and your experience, when we know we have to move our physical bodies, we have to move to places, right? We have to get in a car, we have to get in an airplane, we have to walk to a place, so we pass by things. But in cyberspace or the metaverse, whatever we want to call it, we don't physically have to do that anymore. So why are we holding to an old construct of the idea of moving our physicality when we don't move our physicality? Like, we didn't all have to join to be on this video chat together and walk to a certain place or get in a car to do it. We just had to have the right technology at the right spot, which means an internet connection and a device, right? So there's got to be some thesis around this that you're talking to your clients about.
So I kind of come at it, although I'm a business person, come at it from a creative point of view. I'm a storyteller, I'm an author or a novelist, and running Frog. And if you think about it as creating experiences, I mean, there's all the technology and haptic comes in, and every layer of technology is evolving, kind of co-evolving. But if you think about it in terms of experiences, I'll give you an example. A partner of ours called Stewfish does rock concerts. Okay, they do Elton John, Rolling Stones, Madonna, Beyonce. They're like the top firm in the space, and they work with us, particularly our physical studio. Well, they did a rock concert for Pentakill, which is a virtual band in Fortnite. Okay, and they built the staging, they built the lighting, they just like they do for Madonna or U2. And then they built the stadium. Okay, and it won the Webby Award, right, for the best virtual concert of the year. Now, that might have been luck, and there were other people involved, but they did the core entertainment architecture, they call it. Now, it might have been luck or something, but that's sort of the thesis, is it's creative talent. Some will be able to evolve into these new spaces, some won't. I mean, that's not unusual. That's the way it's been. Industrial designers don't evolve it to digital and so forth and so on, as Ted, you were bringing up before. But I wouldn't underestimate the creative element of this, because at the end of the day, what gets the juices flowing and the emotional attachment, the founder of Frog, form follows emotion. It's the emotion, connecting with consumers, with people at an emotional level, creating those experiences. And I don't think we want to lose sight of that, because the technology is so confusing right now with the competing platforms and just, waves of innovation and haptics and the headsets and all that sort of stuff, that you can really, get overwhelmed. But I think if it's focusing on that customer experience, that customer journey, if you will, that's the constant. You know, that hasn't changed for 100,000 years. You know, I'm not to exaggerate, but you know, voice has been around for 100,000 years. What's ambient voice going to be like in a virtual world? You know, it's funny. There's some things that are constant in all this, and that's part of the journey thesis. Is obviously we help with the tech and the strategy and everything, but the building part, we want to build these compelling, connected kind of experiences, because that wins every time.
Wow, that is a very, very provocative statement and brings a lot of things to mind. Certainly, I think that, you know, spatial sound, the potential of spatial sound is something that people have talked about a lot. There have been products like the Bose headset that wanted to create spatial sound, and ultimately, although the Bose frames are still around, they abandoned this whole idea of spatial sound. But are you saying that that's going to come back in that form, or are you talking about inside of VR? Or I just want to dig into that a little bit, just because I think it has so much depth and potential.
Now you're probing into what I don't know about, which is I'm an inch deep in technology.
Okay.
But the way I would think about it is fascinating. I was with a friend the other day, very large consulting firm, using Oculus for conferencing, for having meetings. And what they found most interesting about the experience, you know, versus say Zoom or Teams, was not the visual, it was the sound.
Yeah.
It was that they could, when the person talked to them, they felt like they were next to them. Sound is the most universal and accessible interface that's ever been created, and that's why we have this agency. I tell brands, like, who are the two most important avatars in your world, and it's not in gaming. It's called Alexa and Siri. How are they representing you? They get questions about you every day, and the weird thing is, for most brands and most companies, they're not being represented. It's whatever Alexa comes up with. And there are ways you can influence, you know, voice search. Voice commerce is a $40 billion business, much more than yeah. No, groceries, music, 50% of music is bought through voice currently. So,
well, and Andy, you may not realize it, but you're demonstrating right now. And we talked about this earlier, that most people that listen to this, that get this podcast, listen to just the audio. There's a very small subset that watch our talking heads. And you are wearing the Apple devices right now, for those few that are going to watch it visually, where Bose largely abandoned their spatial aspirations. Who took up the mantle and is very successful with it is Apple. And within the Apple Music service, they have a whole spatial category where they're remixing audio and taking popular songs and offering that as a spatial category. So they are leaning in to spatial because they already have a very profitable, successful category within the physical devices. You happen to have them in your ears right now, you're using them.
You know,
and that's a really interesting sort of touch point.
And some of these examples will really throw you. So for example, and we can't name the company, but for one of the largest, most prestigious cancer care organizations in the world, we are building out a outpatient voice experience in the home.
Oh.
Okay. And then they get in the car and they have a voice experience. And then they go into, for their outpatient, you know, typically chemo treatments and so on. So think about that. But it is a universal interface used equally by every demographic, small children and senior citizens.
Well, so for somebody who doesn't know much about sound, you just went on a pretty good tear, Andy. So thank you for that.
More the experience.
So we got the whole inch.
You got the whole inch.
So this is all the time we have for our interview. This has been a lot of fun. I think we just sort of scratched the surface. There's so much more I want to ask you about your clients and the way they see the world, right? Because all of a sudden everybody is talking about Metaverse, and you know, they're nowhere nearly as deeply into this as somebody like Cathy. So really, what do they mean when they say that, and what are they afraid of? What do they hope it can do that they can't do today? So that's like a whole another interview. So hopefully we'll get you back and we'll answer some of those questions. Congratulations on the new company. Just knowing who's involved, I'm sure you guys will be super successful. So, you know, Ted and I will enjoy watching your progress.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
That's our show.
You'll be back. So,
have a great weekend, everybody.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.